In this video, I'm going to be disassembling and explaining how an eaton air regulator works. And this is pretty typical on the older trucks, and I don't want to overstep my limits here, but I believe they're pretty common on new trucks either. And what it does is a normal operating pressure of a truck is about 110, 100, 120 psi, in that range there, 100 to 120. And what this does is it reduces that pressure to what it says there, 396 to 431 kPa. Which is 57.5 to 62.5 psi. So it reduces that pressure to about half. And so that's the actual pressure that is used to shift the pistons, the range piston and the overdrive or direct drive piston. And I'm still wondering why exactly they do that. But my guess is if we had full pressure on that piston hitting the gear, it would, pushing the fork into mesh, it would damage the gears. But that's still debatable, because I could have a system where I slowly engage a valve that the pressure doesn't go in all at once. Or just have a small hole so that it takes a bit of time for that pressure to build up. So there are solutions to that, but anyways, that's the reality. That's what it does. It reduces the pressure from 120 to about 60 psi. It's pretty obvious the way the pipes are hooked up here. You've got one entrance, and it says there, in. There, in. And the three others are outputs. And I know this by studying this. I'll show you just in a second how I came to that conclusion. But it does say, there's a website I looked on the internet, it does say that, but disassembling things and understanding how they work are the only 100% foolproof method of determining things and figuring out how they work, what works, and which one is out, which one is in, etc. But the big one is in, and so you kind of infer that the other three are outs, or outputs. So basically 120 psi goes in here, then 60 comes out through this one, and this plug one here. And first of all, so if you look down in there, hopefully you can see that, it's just connected to this here. So this here and this here are the same. I'll disassemble this here, so you can hopefully see the sunlight going through. So these two are connected directly, so they're the same. So whatever is happening to one is happening to the other. And the reason they do this is you can have more pipes connected directly to the fitting. But honestly, I would prefer to just have one output. These things are usually more simple than they look. There's some models that just have an input and an output, in and out. And then if you need to connect pipes to the out, well, you just connect a T, or more than one T if you need it. Right? But anyways, they do it this way here. So there's that little plug there. Alright, so obviously it wasn't this clean. It was full of grease and junk when I got it out. And it was not easy. This top part actually came off pretty easily. But this part here was a pain in the ass to remove. And I had to leave some marks there with the pipe wrench. Let's go ahead and disassemble this. So right away you can see there's an O-ring there. And it's actually in excellent shape. There was a bit of junk inside here, but not a lot at all. So this O-ring still seems to be okay, and there was no leaks. So this was probably made in 1985, and it's still perfectly fine. And then inside you've got this sintered bronze filter. Right, and it's basically lots of tiny little balls of brass connected together so that air can still pass through it, but the dirt and junk will get stopped. And this again was also pretty clean, so I'm thinking that the regulator is not the problem causer in my transmission. Something else is the problem. Alright, so looking inside there, there's just two holes where the air comes in, and that other little hole there. There aren't any other holes. So right away we can determine that air goes in through here, and it goes into this area here via that little hole with the brass thing at the end. So let me go ahead and disassemble this here. And there's you don't have to be, nothing's going to fly out of it when you disassemble it. But there are certain things that do, springs and things that fall off. I mean, if you did disassemble this completely, the spring would fall off. So this here is just a lid, there's no holes on it. And then we have this little cap here. And it's got that little hole, well, not a hole, but just a little ridge there in the middle. And that aligns with a little pin at the end of this cap here, which you won't be able to see, I'm guessing. Oh, maybe. You can kind of see it there. There we go. So it aligns with that thing there. And again, this here is pretty much how I found it. I didn't clean it. You remove the spring. And then you've got this little black cap here, which also comes out. And it's got a bit of oil on it. And it's got a tiny little brass pipe that goes right through it. And finally, you've got another O-ring in there. And that little hole with the passage that we can see from this side. Now, when I leave, let me just put this thing back in here for a second. And when I push this down, it's got a spring, it pushes against a spring that we can't really see, but it's probably inside this plastic thing here, which could probably be replaced and removed if necessary. But again, the spring, the O-ring just looks fine. So the end of that brass valve pipe, as you can see, it comes out through the other side. There's the light shining through it. You can actually see through it. So the little pipe comes from one side, goes straight through the other side. And so if I look through this side here, let me zoom in here. When I push on that cap on the other side, it moves that brass, that valve thing in and out. As you can see, it's moving. There, now you can see it moving. And so what's happening here is once there's this ridge along this plastic cap here, and it will seat on top of that O-ring when I press this fully down like that. So that's that information. And we're just gathering information, and that'll help us understand how things work here. So now where are the outputs connected to? So again, I'm going to do my best to try and show it to you guys. You can see the light there. But this passage is connected to this side. There's 4 holes that go around this here, connected to that side. And the other one is connected to that side. That one's a little bit more easy to see. So again, they're connected, and they're all the same height under the O-ring. So whatever, again, all 3 of them are connected. They're the same thing. They're the same. They're getting the exact same pressure at the exact same time. If we just had one hole with the T on it, it would be the same. So from looking at the passages, we've deducted that. So now we can really understand how things work here. So air pressure goes in through there. It passes through the little hole on the valve here. And meanwhile, the spring is pushing down on this here. But if the spring is partially open, if it's not fully closed, which it normally isn't, air just goes in through that little hole, through that center hole, and exits through the sides on the outputs. So if the air system is off, that pressure, and then we turn the truck on, that air pressure is slowly building up. And it's pressurizing the hoses until what happens is, so at the same time that you've got air coming in through here, going out through the outputs to the hoses, to the pistons, it's also passing through here. And it's building up pressure here until when it finally builds up enough pressure, it's going to force this thing down. And that's going to close the air to the outputs, thereby reducing the pressure. So the reason it needs a spring is the spring reduces the force necessary to move this piston downwards in half. So that you only, even though you've got 120 psi going in through here, it only takes 60 psi to help the spring cut off the flow here. So what happens is, as soon as the truck hits 60 psi, it's going to close this. And now you only have air in the hoses. So when you operate the shift, you're pretty much just using the air in the hoses, but as soon as that air gets depleted, it opens up and more air comes in before you know it, pretty much. So that's how this thing works. I'll just show you real quick here how the filter works. So as you can see, there's a space around the filter, and the air has to go around the spaces and into, it's forced to go past the brass, man, I just forgot the name of this thing. the brass filter, and then through the center. And if this cap is not tight enough, as you can see on the cap itself, there's another O-ring that squashes against the edge here of the brass valve. So if that O-ring goes bad, then air will, unfiltered air will be allowed to pass through the top. And as you can see, these things are pretty serviceable. You just remove the air filter, sintered bronze air filter, and you mix it in gasoline or alcohol or some cleaning solution. And then what I like to do is I just squash it against the palm of my hand and blow on the inside here. And that forces the air to go through here and through the inside out, and that just pushes all the dirt away. Just pushes it outwards. So remember, normally it's going the opposite. It's going from the outside to the inside of the cylinder. So to get the particles and crap out, you have to do the opposite. Blow air in so that it pushes the particles outward. But as you can see, it was there was a little bit of junk right where the air went into it, but this is not plugged up at all. The spring looks fine. This here is, again, looks perfectly fine. Oh yeah, so just notice how sensitive this system is. If that little hole gets plugged, then the regulator will either be, it will not work properly, right? Now, my question is, I wonder if there should be an O-ring here. Because when I have this assembled, I'm just going to assemble this here. Let's reassemble it here. The spring pushes on it like that. Now, depending on the height of that pin there in the cap, that's going to determine, and how much I tighten this, that's going to determine how far in the spring will seat. Now, I can't really feel it touching any resistance until I hit the right about there. Then I can sort of feel it grab on the spring here. And while I'm turning this, if you can notice inside, it's hard to do with one hand, it's actually pushing that brass valve further into the hole here, so reducing the flow of air. So if this here is over tightened, then you might not have, what's going to happen is it's going to force that valve closed, and no air is going to go, or less air is going to go into the, if it's too much to the point where the spring is smashed, then it might not have enough air pressure to push that spring out of the way. So there will not be any air or insufficient air going into the coming out. So that's kind of my worry here. It's hard to turn it and show you guys at the same time. But as I'm turning this here, I can see that valve being pushed forward. So I know that it's pushing on the spring and it's closing the valve. It's trying to close the valve. Now, I don't know how much is closed. And the way I can test it, the primitive way, is I'll reassemble this and I'll blow air into this hole here and see if any air is coming out. So yeah, it's funny that I think that there should be an O-ring in here to seal the this thread area here. So right now there's nothing sealing it. So there should be an O-ring on this ridge, that ridge there, I think, or maybe it just seals aluminum on aluminum. I don't know. It could be. But this thing was tight as hell. So I'm not sure, but it's, yeah. Alright, so I think that pretty much covers how the air regulator works. Now, I must say that, as you can see, there's nothing special about it. It's just an air regulator. It gets 120 psi and it reduces it to 60 psi. So any other air regulator that is available, I can use. And I might be able to use this to my advantage because I looked at a place called Granger online. I went online and looked at this place, and they sell hydraulic and pneumatic parts. And they've got hundreds of air regulators. And some are adjustable. I'll show you another air regulator. Actually, no, I won't. But there's an air regulator on the end of hoses, like air hoses for, spray paint guns. So it's nothing special. It doesn't have to be the same brand. It doesn't have to have a part number. It's just an air regulator. You can just use pretty much whatever air regulator is available, as long as it's got the correct pressures. So I might, if I can, they actually had what looked like bigger, more heavy-duty unit with the required PSI settings. And it was actually a bit cheaper than buying another one of these. But this here, again, it seems to be fine. I will have to test it. I'll certainly test it for sure. But it all indicates that this is okay. I might need some adjustment with this thing here. Again, if it's closed too much, then there's not enough air. So the regulator itself, all the parts are okay, everything is working, but it's not working properly because this here is too tight or missing an O-ring. And that's the bad thing about these. Some regulators, they're adjustable. But so you can, whatever thing is happening, whatever's happening, whatever mechanism you have, you can kind of adjust it. Whereas this here relies completely on the torque of the cap here. So it's called a set style regulator, but really, there is room for error. So I'm going to reassemble this, and I'll have to get an air gauge and test this. But yeah, I hope this helps you fellow truck drivers there and mechanics. Have a nice day.